Well, hello, this is Adam, and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today, the strange features and quirks, yes, I said quirks. I don't know what else to call it, though, of the 71 AMC Ambassador. And because it's an AMC, it has a lot of quirks, which I find charming. And frankly, even if I were a new car buyer back in the day, I would have found charming as well. So, the first is obviously the styling, which is very interesting. This car was designed by Dick Teague and his team at American Motors, and previous to American Motors, Dick Teague was a designer at Packard, and some say that this front end is really an homage to his time at Packard, and you can see it a little bit in terms of how this hood rises up in the middle and then goes back down. I can definitely see that. And while the front is all Packard, the rear is all 1971 LTD. Not sure who copied whom or how that happened, but that is very similar to a 71 LTD rear. This car's just in beautiful shape. It's 29,000 original miles. Everything on it is just about perfect, including the chrome, all the lights. Obviously, it was a well-loved car. So let's start with the first thing, and that's these AMC door handles. AMC loved to use these door handles, even on Jeep tailgates back in the day. They used it on everything. And they work quite well. I don't find them offensive at all. But definitely different from all the other door handles that other auto companies were using. We'll start on the inside. The first is that awful key buzzer that a lot of these cars had. Rich cloth interior here. Split bench seat. So the first really unique thing about this is the HVAC system, which is all done with Bowden cables and you making adjustments manually. There are no vacuum diaphragms in this. So if you want heat, you move this down, and then that opens the heater core valve under hood. If you want to move the defroster lever, you move this up and down to change the air outlet so that you get some air coming out there. There's a fan for the heater, there's a fan for the air conditioning, and then there's this rotational knob that in order to start the air conditioning, you basically want to make sure the temp thing is all the way up. You start pulling this down and kick on the low speed fan, and then you rotate this dial, which is basically a rheostat, and the compressor will kick on the second that you move it off of the off position. And this is not something where you can control the temperature by a blend door. It actually controls the temperature by how often the compressor kicks on and off. Kind of like an aftermarket AC almost. And when you rotate it all the way to the desert only setting, it won't allow the compressor to shut off. It says desert only because that can cause the evaporator to freeze over if it's a moist day. So you only want to use that really when you're in a low humidity climate, and the air conditioning in this car is extra cold. It also has an air vent right above the driver that points right at you, which I love. I think that's great. And there's a little door on it that you can close it off. All these vents have little things to shut them off. So if you actually want all the air to come out, the heat, you have to manually close all these different vents up here. And then you can see there's even a little door on this one. You can have it open, you can have it closed. But once you close all the others, then the only place for the heat to come out is down there. So the heater box is down there. Really strange setup overall for the HVAC system. Next is these door locks on this car. There's no plungers here up front. You lock it by pushing this lever forward and pulling it back. That's the door lock and unlock. And the rear doors, it does have the plunger. Why they did that, I don't know on the front doors, but they both have it. Next, you've got the wing windows here where you push the little button, and then you can rotate it, and then you push out, really out here. Of course, the door is open now, so it's harder to do. and then you rotate the window. Kind of pull it this way, and then there it goes. It locks back into position. Next we have the vertically oriented radio, very similar to the 63 Corvettes, the C2 Corvettes, and later the Chevy Citation. This is an AM radio. Let me close the door here. You can hear it. Works just fine. One speaker.
Adults living with asthma.
So works just fine. Next you have the funky headliner, which AMC always had some funky cheap headliner. This is almost like a cardboardy feeling. It's hard to describe. It's not a fabric. It's kind of cheap, but it works. One color headliner, irrespective of what interior you got. So they were early pioneers in this. I think that the Pacer was also the first car to have blackout window glass trim, which was a cost-saving measure because they didn't have to finish off on the interior that area that's behind the glass. Next on the interior we have these seats which individually recline, and it's kind of an interesting way that they recline. You have to ratchet the seat back forward and back. Basically move this lever back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it goes flat. So I'll put the camera down and show you how far back it goes. Well, there you have it. Very early adopters of seat back reclines in AMC. The earlier cars actually had seats that you could fold flat almost into a bed. And then you just pull it up and it locks back in place. Handy if you want to take a snooze. Next, let's go under hood, because this is where a lot of the AMC Quirks are, and why people called them all makes combined. Open the hood here. Okay, so here we have under hood, and first thing you notice is this is a Motorcraft 4300 4-barrel carburetor from Ford. But it's got an American Motors logo and an American Motors tag on it. So this one's original to the car. When I got this car, the seller said that it's a little bit cold-blooded and you have to wait for it to warm up, but then it runs really well. Well, this choke rod, which is typical, is missing a clip. And I just put it back in, and now the choke works fine. It was just stuck open before, so it would stall out when it was cold until you let it warm up for a couple minutes. That was easy. Another interesting thing here is this choke heater has this bracket, which on the Fords, the coolant, the heater core tube would run here and help warm the choke heater. Well, the heater core doesn't run that way on this car, so it's just there hanging out, not doing anything. Bit strange. And you have a Ford starter relay here. You've got a GM style alternator, I believe. You have a Ford starter. And this car is a 71, so it has a Borg-Warner automatic transmission. Later they would use the Chrysler Torque Flights. And I actually thought that this was going to be a Torque Flight car. And I went to just go take off the air cleaner, and I noticed that there's no kickdown rod. And I thought, well, that's weird. All the Torque Flights have that. Then I remembered that in 71 AMC was still using the Borg-Warner automatics, which is what that has, which leads to the next funky thing. If that's true, where is the kickdown switch on this car? There's no rod. I'll show you where it is. This was another issue with the car. The transmission wasn't kicking down, and the accelerator wasn't getting its full travel. That's because the kickdown switch is right here. And you can see the accelerator contacts it when you push hard enough. Well, that switch was misadjusted, and now I've adjusted it and it's fine. But an interesting place, the only time I've ever seen a kickdown switch inside on a car. Other transmissions like the GM Turbo Hydromatic 400s use kickdown switches, but they've always been under hood, at least that I've seen. This, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, are the vent poles. You open these, pretty common for cars of the era, and that's the bright light switch. Any old car buff is going to know that, but for people new to the hobby, might not know what that is. That's for the bright lights. This is for the vent poles. You have one on the other side as well. Also under hood, you can see we have a Rochester Products or GM evaporative canister for emissions. So really a hodgepodge of different things under hood. This is definitely a GM style distributor cap with a window for the points, to set the points in there. I haven't taken the cap off yet, but the cap is definitely a GM style. And this says Delco Remy on the coil, so you know who makes that, GM. Really fun little hodgepodge of different automotive components under here. I believe this is also a Saginaw steering gear. So American Motors was buying a lot of components from different companies. One thing you'll also notice is that the motor compartment rails on these AMCs are really the same width no matter what car that you get. And you can see they have almost like this filler panel in between the motor compartment and the fender. I suspect that was so that they could run all these cars down the same assembly line and use the same fixtures and not have to pay extra capital expenditures to have different ones. So it looks a little funny when you see it, but you'll see, you know, Matadors, Ambassadors, they have this filler panel here, and if you got a Concorde or an Eagle, it doesn't. Just a different way of doing things. This is AMC's unique 360 cubic inch V8. It was their own V8. Different from Chrysler's 360, different from everybody else, their own design. Largest size was the 401. They also were a bit funky in how they did the front suspension. It's the only American company I know of that has these strut rods behind the control arm to help locate it instead of in front of it. Cadillacs and Fords had those in front of the control arm. Here you can see it's mounted behind the control arm. Very different. You can also see another fun little quirk here underneath. And there it is. In front of the rear wheel it says lift on either side, so you know where to lift the car. I think that's pretty interesting. I've never seen a car where it tells you lift. This is a unibody car. And look at how nice all the rocker panels are and everything. Just like new. Car's in great shape. Next is this Ambassador logo with the 360. You can see it has a little checkered flag in there in the zero. The 401s and the 304s also had the checkered flag in the zero. Kind of a nice detail. As well as this lower trim. You can imagine this is impossible to find, and thankfully this car, it's in great shape. Next we have a very interesting trunk spring. There's a little torsional spring on either side here. I've never seen this on another American car to help lift the trunk, which is good and bad because as you lower it, it gets stiffer and stiffer, and it's really stiff at this point, and it almost has no resistance with the trunk lid up. But it works just fine, isn't offensive, like I said. This car was from Mount Pleasant Motors in Toronto originally, as you can see. And it is getting windy out, so that might be the end of the video for today. But hope you enjoyed this little walk around of some of the unique features and quirks of this 1971 AMC Ambassador. Stay tuned for the full review. Until then, thanks again for watching and take care.